I walked into that baby shower, holding a gift I'd spent 3 weeks searching for, my hands trembling slightly as I approached the pristine white table covered in pastel ribbons and tiny booties. The room was filled with laughter, the kind of warm, genuine joy that comes when women gather to celebrate new life. But the moment Margaret saw me, her smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. She moved toward me with the precision of a predator, her voice cutting through the cheerful chatter like a blade. "You're not woman enough for my son," she hissed, loud enough that the conversations around us began to die down. "Look at Sarah over there, already showing at 4 months. That's what a real woman looks like." The silence that followed felt like drowning. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some pitying, others curious, a few embarrassed on my behalf. I stood there holding that stupid gift, a hand-embroidered blanket I'd commissioned from an artist in Maine, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. Without a word, I placed it on the table next to the cake, and walked straight out of that country club, my heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like shame. In the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine running, I pulled out my phone and opened the message I'd been saving for 3 months. The photo was crystal clear, the 2 pink lines unmistakable, dated just 2 days ago. I typed quickly, "Actually, Margaret, here's what a real woman looks like." Then I hit send. My phone exploded within minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What I regretted most wasn't walking into that baby shower. It was that I'd actually believed things would be different this time. That after 3 years of marriage to David, his mother might finally see me as something more than the woman who stole her precious boy away. I'd spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, a soft blue dress that David said brought out my eyes. I'd even gotten my hair done at that expensive salon downtown, the one Margaret always raved about. The pregnancy test had been burning a hole in my purse for 2 days. I'd taken it Tuesday morning, stared at those 2 pink lines until my eyes watered, then taken 3 more just to be absolutely certain. David was on a business trip in Chicago, wouldn't be back until Friday, and I'd wanted to tell him first. But something about the way Margaret had been treating me lately, the snide comments about my career, my age, my apparent inability to give her grandchildren, had made me bring that test along like armor. I should have known better than to think she'd changed. Margaret had never liked me, not from the moment David brought me home for Sunday dinner 4 years ago. I was 28 then, a marketing coordinator at a tech startup, living in a studio apartment in Brooklyn that I was actually proud of. But to Margaret, I was just another girl trying to trap her son. She made that clear the first night when she served dinner, and forgot to set a place for me, then acted shocked when David pointed it out. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I'm just not used to David bringing home strays." Strays, like I was some abandoned animal he'd found on the street. The pattern continued for months. Birthday parties where I wasn't mentioned in the family photos. Christmas dinners where she'd give everyone thoughtful, expensive gifts and hand me a generic candle from the drugstore. Holiday cards addressed only to David, as if I didn't exist. When we got engaged, she cried. Not happy tears. The kind of tears you shed at funerals. David always made excuses for her. She just needs time to adjust. You know how mothers are with their sons. But I knew what I knew. Margaret didn't just dislike me. She actively wished I would disappear. The fertility struggles started about a year after we got married. At first it didn't seem like a big deal. We were young, healthy, had plenty of time, but months turned into a year, and 1 year turned into 2. The doctor visits became routine. Temperature charts, ovulation strips, timed intercourse that felt more like a medical procedure than intimacy. David was supportive, patient, understanding. Margaret was the opposite. Maybe it's stress from your job, she'd say during family dinners, her voice dripping with false concern. You know Sarah quit working the moment she and Michael started trying. Now look at her, pregnant with twins. Or have you considered that maybe God is trying to tell you something? Some women just aren't meant to be mothers. Each comment landed like a physical blow. I'd excuse myself to the bathroom and cry silently into my hands. Then return to the table with a forced smile, pretending I hadn't heard what she'd said. David would squeeze my hand under the table, but he never confronted her. Never told her to stop. never stood up for me in the moments when I needed it most. The worst part wasn't even Margaret's cruelty. It was the way she'd turn around and shower affection on David's sister Sarah, who seemed to get pregnant just by looking at her husband. Sarah had 3 kids already, with twins on the way, and Margaret treated each pregnancy like a personal victory. She'd throw elaborate baby showers, buy expensive gifts, post dozens of photos on Facebook with captions like "so blessed to have such a fertile family." Fertile family, as if I wasn't part of it. As if my struggles somehow reflected poorly on their genetic superiority. The baby shower invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, addressed to David and guest. Not my name, not Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, just guest. Like I was some random person he might bring along. I'd stared at that invitation for a full hour, reading it over and over, trying to decide if I was being overly sensitive. But deep down I knew it was intentional. Everything with Margaret was intentional. David had encouraged me to go. Maybe this is her way of extending an olive branch. Sarah's your sister-in-law too. You should be there to celebrate. I'd wanted to believe him. I'd wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Margaret was ready to accept me as part of the family. So I'd RSVP'd yes, bought that beautiful blanket, and shown up with hope in my heart like an idiot. The country club was exactly the kind of place Margaret would choose. All white tablecloths, and crystal chandeliers, the kind of old money elegance that made people like me feel like imposters. I'd arrived 15 minutes late on purpose, hoping to slip in quietly and find a seat in the back. But the moment I walked through those French doors, Margaret spotted me like a hawk eyeing prey. She was holding court near the gift table, surrounded by her usual circle of admirers. Women who'd known her for decades, who shared her worldview about what constituted proper behavior and appropriate life choices. They all turned when I approached, their conversations fading to polite murmurs, as I navigated through the sea of designer handbags and perfectly blown-out hair. "Oh, Emma," Margaret had said, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved just for me. "Sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. How nice that you could make it. I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away from work." The emphasis on works made it sound like a 4-letter word. I'd smiled, the practiced smile I'd perfected over 3 years of family gatherings. I wouldn't miss celebrating Sarah and the twins. "This is for you." I'd held out the gift, wrapped in soft yellow paper with a delicate ribbon I'd tied myself. Margaret had taken it with the tips of her fingers, as if it might be contaminated. "How thoughtful. I'm sure it's lovely." She'd set it aside without even pretending to be interested, then turned back to her audience. "Girls, you simply must see the nursery photos Sarah sent. 2 identical cribs from that boutique in Manhattan, the one that did Chelsea Clinton's baby room." I'd stood there for a moment, invisible among the cooing women, feeling like a child who'd been dismissed from the adult table. That's when I decided to get some air, to step outside and collect myself, before attempting to find a seat. But Margaret wasn't done with me yet. She'd followed me toward the terrace doors, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a staccato rhythm that sounded like warning shots. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, meant only for me, but somehow it carried anyway. "You know, Emma, I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas. About wanting to give David children someday." I'd stopped walking, my hand frozen on the door handle. Christmas, when I'd made the mistake of confiding in her during a moment of wine-induced vulnerability. When I'd told her about our struggles, about the doctors and the tests, and the hope that felt more fragile with each passing month. "The thing is," she'd continued, "some women just aren't cut out for motherhood. It's not their fault, really, it's just nature's way of making sure children go to the right families." She'd paused, letting the words sink in like poison. "Look at Sarah, 4 pregnancies, and each one easier than the last. That's what good genetics look like." I'd turned around slowly, my hand still gripping the door handle like an anchor. "Excuse me," Margaret had smiled then, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, don't take it personally, dear. I'm just saying that maybe you should consider that there might be a reason things haven't worked out for you and David. Maybe you're just not woman enough for my son." The words had hit me like a physical blow, not woman enough. As if my worth as a human being could be measured by the contents of my uterus. As if 3 years of loving David with everything I had meant nothing, because I hadn't produced grandchildren on demand. But what made it worse was the audience. I'd looked around and realized that several women had overheard the entire exchange. Sarah's mother-in-law, who'd always been kind to me. David's cousin Jennifer, who'd struggled with fertility herself. Even Mrs. Chen from down the street, who barely knew me but had witnessed Margaret's public humiliation of her son's wife. The silence that followed was deafening. No one spoke, no one defended me. They just stared, some with pity, others with embarrassment, a few with what looked almost like satisfaction. I'd felt exposed, raw, like every private pain I'd ever carried was suddenly on display for their entertainment. That's when I'd walked away, not stormed out, not made a scene, just quietly placed my gift on the table and left. But sitting in that parking lot, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, I'd realized something important. I was done being Margaret's punching bag. I was done letting her treat me like I was less than human. I was done pretending that her cruelty was somehow acceptable because she was David's mother. The pregnancy test photo on my phone wasn't just 2 pink lines, it was proof that I was exactly woman enough. Proof that her cruelty had been wrong from the very beginning. Proof that I could give David exactly what she claimed I never could. I'd stared at that photo for a long time before sending it. The test was dated 2 days ago, Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m., according to the timestamp. I'd taken it in our bathroom, David still asleep in the next room, my hands trembling as I'd watched those lines appear. Pink as cotton candy, clear as daylight, undeniable as gravity. I'd wanted to wake David up immediately, to share the moment with him, to see his face light up with joy. But something had held me back. Maybe it was 3 years of disappointment, of negative tests, and false hopes, and medical appointments that led nowhere. Maybe it was the fear that if I said it out loud it might not be real. Or maybe somewhere deep down, I'd already known that I was going to need this moment as ammunition. The message had been simple, direct, impossible to misinterpret. I'd attached the photo and typed, "Actually, Margaret, here's what a real woman looks like." Then I'd hit send before I could change my mind. The response had been immediate. My phone had started buzzing within seconds, notification after notification lighting up the screen. A text from David's sister Sarah, "OMG Emma, is this real?" A missed call from David's brother Michael. Another text from someone whose number I didn't recognize. "Holy shit, did you really just send that to Margaret?" But it was Margaret's response that had made my heart race. A phone call that I'd let go to voicemail, followed immediately by a text that was pure unfiltered rage. "How dare you embarrass me like that in front of my friends? This is not over." Sitting in that country club parking lot, watching the notification count climb, I'd felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For the first time since I'd known Margaret, I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the one being humiliated, or dismissed or treated like a second-class citizen. I was the one holding the cards. The photo had gone to everyone. The group chat that Margaret used for family announcements. The thread that included all the women from today's baby shower. Even some extended family members whose numbers were in my phone from various holiday gatherings. I hadn't meant for it to spread so widely, but I'd been in that group chat for 3 years, watching Margaret hold court, watching her make announcements, and share opinions, and generally act like the matriarch of a dynasty. Now everyone knew. Everyone had seen the proof that Margaret's favorite insult had been wrong all along. The woman she'd claimed wasn't fit to be a mother was carrying their precious David's child. My phone had rung again, this time it was David. Emma, what the hell is going on? My mom is hysterical. Sarah's texting me pictures of pregnancy tests. Are you pregnant? Are we pregnant? I'd taken a deep breath, suddenly aware that this was the moment I'd been dreaming about for 2 years. The moment I got to tell my husband we were having a baby, but instead of being a private, intimate conversation, it was happening in a country club parking lot, while his family imploded via group text. Yes, I'd said simply, "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end had stretched for what felt like forever. Then I'd heard something that sounded like a sob. Emma, oh my God, are you sure? When did you find out?" "Tuesday morning. I wanted to tell you in person when you got back from Chicago, but your mother, I'd trailed off, not sure how to explain what had just happened without sounding petty or vindictive. What about my mother, Emma? She's calling me crying, saying you sent some kind of photo to the whole family. She's not making any sense. I'd closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. David, she humiliated me. In front of everyone at the baby shower, she told me I wasn't woman enough to be your wife, that there was a reason we hadn't gotten pregnant yet. So I showed her the test. Another long silence. Then David's voice, quieter now, more careful. You sent a pregnancy test photo to my mother. I sent it to everyone. The whole group chat. I was angry, David. I was hurt and angry, and I wanted her to know she was wrong.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'd heard him take a shaky breath. Emma, this is huge. This is the best news I've ever gotten in my life. But maybe we should have talked about how to handle the announcement before. Before what? Before I defended myself. Before I finally stood up to your mother after 3 years of abuse. The words had come out sharper than I'd intended, but I hadn't been able to stop them. David, she's been horrible to me since the day we met. You know it, I know it, everyone knows it. And today she crossed a line. I know she can be difficult. Difficult? I'd laughed, but there had been no humor in it. David, she told me I wasn't woman enough for you. In front of 20 people, at a baby shower. That's not difficult. That's cruel. The line had gone quiet again. I'd been able to hear voices in the background. Probably his colleagues from the Chicago office. He'd been at some kind of conference, surrounded by people, trying to have this conversation while maintaining his professional composure. Look, he'd said finally. Let me call you back in an hour. I need to process this. We're having a baby, Emma. We're actually having a baby. Yes, I'd said softly. We are. I love you so much, and I'm sorry about my mother. We'll figure this out. But after he'd hung up, I'd sat in that parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching my phone light up with messages and calls from numbers I recognized, and some I didn't. The photo was spreading beyond the family now. Someone had screenshot it and shared it with friends. Someone else had posted it on social media with commentary about toxic mother-in-laws. It was becoming a story, taking on a life of its own. That's when I'd realized what I'd done. This wasn't just about defending myself against Margaret's cruelty anymore. This was about our pregnancy, our private joy, being turned into public entertainment. Our baby's first announcement to the world wasn't going to be a cute social media post, or a thoughtful phone call to grandparents. It was going to be a weapon I'd used in a family war. The regret had hit me like a wave. Not regret for standing up to Margaret, she'd deserved that and more, but regret for the way I'd done it. For letting my anger turn something beautiful into something ugly. For making our baby's existence about Margaret instead of about us. I'd driven home in a daze, my phone silent in my purse, refusing to look at any more messages. Our apartment had felt different when I'd walked through the door. Quieter, somehow, like it was holding its breath, waiting for David to come home and for us to figure out what happened next. The pregnancy test was still on the bathroom counter where I'd left it Tuesday morning, propped up against my jewelry box like a tiny beacon of hope. I'd picked it up and stared at those 2 pink lines again, trying to recapture the pure joy I'd felt when they'd first appeared. But all I could think about was Margaret's face, when she'd seen them, the shock and rage, and something that might have been fear. I'd spent 3 years being afraid of her. Afraid of her judgment, her disapproval, her ability to make me feel small and worthless. But for the first time, I'd seen fear in her eyes. Fear that she might have been wrong about me. Fear that she might have underestimated the quiet woman who'd been taking her abuse for so long. Fear that the power dynamic in our family was about to shift in a way she couldn't control. The house had felt too quiet, too empty, too full of possibility and uncertainty. So I'd done what I always did when I needed to think. I'd made tea, Earl Grey with honey, and sat at our kitchen table with my laptop, trying to process what had just happened, and what it meant for our future. The baby was real. That was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that was purely good in this whole mess. David and I were going to be parents. We were going to have the family we'd dreamed about for 2 years. Margaret's opinions about my worthiness as a wife and mother were about to become irrelevant in the most definitive way possible. But the way I'd shared that news, The anger and hurt that had driven me to weaponize our joy had complicated everything. There would be consequences. Margaret wasn't the type to let something like this go. She'd retaliate, probably in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. And David would be caught in the middle, trying to balance his loyalty to his mother with his love for his wife and unborn child. I'd opened my laptop and started typing, not sure what I was writing or why, just needing to get the thoughts out of my head and onto the screen. It had started as a letter to David, trying to explain what had happened and why I'd reacted the way I did. But it had turned into something else. A record of every slight, every cruel comment, every moment over the past 3 years when Margaret had made me feel like I didn't belong in their family. Reading it back, I'd been shocked by how much I'd endured, how many times I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed my pride, excused her behavior for the sake of family peace. David had asked me once why I didn't just ignore her, why I let her comments get to me so much. But seeing it all laid out in black and white, I'd realized that ignoring systematic emotional abuse wasn't strength. It was survival, and I'd been surviving Margaret for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to fight back. The pregnancy test photo hadn't just been about proving her wrong. It had been about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, my right to exist in this family without apologizing for who I was. Margaret had spent 3 years trying to convince everyone, including me, that I wasn't good enough for David. That I was somehow defective, inadequate, unworthy of the Patterson family name. But that test, those 2 pink lines, proved something she couldn't argue with. I was exactly as much woman as any other woman. My body was doing exactly what women's bodies were designed to do. Her son had chosen me, married me, and was having a baby with me, regardless of what she thought about my qualifications for the job. The satisfaction I'd felt in that parking lot had been real and justified. For 3 years, Margaret had held all the power in our relationship. She'd been the judge, jury, and executioner of my worth as a family member. But pregnancy had shifted that balance. Grandchildren were currency in Margaret's world, the ultimate mark of success and family legacy. And I was the one carrying her first grandchild with the Patterson name. She needed me now in a way she never had before. She needed me to be healthy, happy, and willing to include her in our child's life. She needed me to forgive her years of cruelty and pretend they hadn't happened for the sake of family unity. She needed me to be the bigger person, the gracious daughter-in-law who rose above petty conflicts for the good of everyone involved. But I wasn't sure I was ready to be that person. Not yet, not after what she'd said today, and not without some kind of acknowledgement that her behavior had been wrong. An apology felt like too much to ask for. Margaret didn't seem capable of genuine remorse. But at minimum, I needed her to understand that the old dynamic between us was over. That she couldn't treat me like a second-class citizen anymore, and expect me to smile and take it. My phone had buzzed with a text from David. Landing in 2 hours, we need to talk about everything. I love you and I'm so excited about the baby. Try to ignore my family's drama until I get home. Ignore the drama, as if it were that simple. As if I could just pretend the last few hours hadn't happened, and go back to being the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law who never made waves. But something fundamental had shifted today, and I wasn't sure we could go back even if we wanted to. I'd walked to the bedroom, and stood in front of the full-length mirror, turning sideways to see if there was any visible sign yet of the life growing inside me. Nothing obvious, just a slight bloating that could have been from lunch. But knowing what I knew, seeing what I'd seen on that test, everything looked different. I looked different. I felt different. Stronger, somehow. Like I'd finally found my voice after years of whispering. Like I'd finally stood up after years of being pushed down. The pregnancy was part of it, but not all of it. Mainly, I'd just gotten tired of being afraid. Tired of walking on eggshells around Margaret's feelings while she trampled all over mine. Tired of making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. David's family was about to learn something important about me, something I should have shown them years ago. I wasn't just the quiet woman who married their son. I wasn't just a convenient target for their frustrations and insecurities. I was a Patterson now too, whether Margaret liked it or not. And I was about to become the mother of a Patterson grandchild, which gave me a kind of power in their family structure that I'd never had before. The question was what I was going to do with that power. How I was going to use it. Whether I was going to be generous and forgiving, or whether I was going to make them earn my forgiveness the same way they'd made me earn their acceptance. Sitting in that quiet apartment, my hand resting on my still flat stomach, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to apologize for defending myself. I wasn't going to pretend that what happened today was somehow my fault. And I wasn't going to go back to being the doormat I'd been for the last 3 years. Margaret had wanted to know if I was woman enough for her son. Well, she was about to find out exactly how much woman I was. And something told me she wasn't going to like the answer. David came home that Friday night looking like he'd aged 5 years and 24 hours. I heard his key in the lock, and watched him walk through our front door, carrying his travel bag and the weight of a family crisis he hadn't asked for. His face was exhausted, confused, caught between joy and chaos in a way that made my heart ache for him. He dropped his bag by the door, and just stood there for a moment, looking at me like he wasn't sure if I was the same person he'd left in Chicago 3 days ago. Then he crossed the room in 3 quick steps and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Are we really having a baby?" he whispered into my hair. "We're really having a baby," I confirmed, and for a moment everything else fell away. The phone calls, the group texts, Margaret's rage, all of it disappeared as we held each other in our living room, and let the reality of it sink in. We were going to be parents. After 2 years of trying, of hoping, of disappointment and medical appointments and timed intimacy that felt more clinical than romantic, it was finally happening. But the moment couldn't last forever. David pulled back and studied my face, his hands still on my shoulders. "Emma, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. My mom she's beyond upset." I felt my jaw tighten automatically. "Your mom is upset. She's the one who humiliated me in front of 20 people. She's the one who told me I wasn't woman enough for you." "I know, and that was wrong. But sending that photo to the entire family group chat." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his way of trying to process stress. "Emma, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. My aunt called from Florida, asking if it was real. My cousin posted something on Facebook. My grandmother somehow saw it, and called my mom crying because she thought you were announcing a miscarriage." A miscarriage. The word hit me like cold water. Why would she think that? Because nobody could understand why you'd send a pregnancy test photo as some kind of weapon. They thought maybe you'd lost a baby, and were having some kind of breakdown. David sat down heavily on our couch, his head in his hands. "Emma, I've been fielding calls all day trying to explain something I don't fully understand myself." I sat down beside him, my own exhaustion settling in like fog. "What don't you understand? Your mother has been cruel to me for 3 years. Yesterday she crossed every line there was to cross. So I proved her wrong, but you made our baby announcement into a declaration of war." The words stung because they were true. I had weaponized our pregnancy, turned what should have been pure joy into ammunition for a family conflict. But I wasn't ready to admit that yet, wasn't ready to take responsibility for the chaos without David acknowledging what had driven me to that point. "David, do you know what it's like to smile and nod while someone systematically destroys your self-worth? Do you know what it's like to sit at family dinners, while your mother-in-law makes jokes about your infertility? To have her introduce you to people as David's wife's like my name doesn't matter enough to remember." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I know she's been difficult." "Difficult?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She told me yesterday that some women just aren't cut out for motherhood, that maybe God was trying to tell me something, that maybe there was a reason things hadn't worked out for us." David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "She said that. She said that. In front of everyone. And then she told me I wasn't woman enough for you." I stood up, too agitated to sit still. "So yes, I sent that pregnancy test photo, and yes, I sent it to everyone. Because I wanted them all to know that everything she's said about me for 3 years has been wrong." David was quiet again, processing. I could see him trying to reconcile the mother he loved with the woman who had said those things to his wife. It was a struggle I'd watched him go through dozens of times over the years. This cognitive dissonance between Margaret the loving mother and Margaret the cruel mother-in-law. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Finally, I want you to understand why I did what I did. I want you to stop making excuses for her behavior. And I want you to make it clear to your family that I'm not going to be their punching bag anymore. Emma, she's my mother, and I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. Doesn't that count for something? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could see David weighing his loyalties, trying to find a path that wouldn't require him to choose sides. But some situations don't allow for neutrality. Some situations require you to decide what matters most. My phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a third. David's phone started ringing immediately after, the caller ID showing Margaret's name and photo. We both stared at the devices like they were live grenades. Answer it, I said. David hesitated, then picked up. Hi, Mom. I could hear Margaret's voice through the speaker, high-pitched and frantic, though I couldn't make out the specific words. David's face grew more tense with each passing second.
Mom, slow down, what are you talking about? He listened for another moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. What post? What social media? My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and opened Instagram, then Facebook, then Twitter, searching for whatever had set Margaret off this time. It didn't take long to find it. Someone had taken a screenshot of my pregnancy test photo and posted it with the caption, "When your toxic mother-in-law gets exactly what she deserves." This woman just ended a whole family with 2 pink lines. The post had been shared hundreds of times, with comments ranging from supportive to critical to downright vicious. Oh no, I whispered. David was still on the phone with Margaret, his voice getting sharper. Mom, I don't care what people are saying online. This is between our family. A pause. No, you cannot demand that Emma apologize publicly. She's pregnant, for God's sake. Margaret's voice got louder, angry enough that I could hear fragments through the phone. Something about reputation, something about embarrassment, something about teaching me a lesson. That's enough, David said firmly. I'm hanging up now, we'll talk when everyone has calmed down. He ended the call and immediately turned his phone to silent. Emma, it's everywhere. Someone posted the photo on a mommy blog. Another person shared it in a pregnancy support group. There are think pieces about toxic in-laws and family drama. Our private business is public entertainment now. I felt sick. This wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd wanted to put Margaret in her place, not turn our family into internet content. David, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go viral. But you did mean for it to hurt her. I couldn't deny that. Yes, I did. And now she's talking about lawyers. About defamation and invasion of privacy. She's saying you deliberately tried to destroy her reputation. Her reputation. I stood up again, anger flaring fresh. What about my reputation? What about 2 years of her telling everyone who would listen that I was broken, defective, not good enough for her son? Emma, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Don't. I held up my hand. Don't you dare quote platitudes at me right now. Your mother has been emotionally abusing me for 3 years, and the one time I fight back, suddenly I'm the problem. David was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. You're right. What? You're right. My mother has been horrible to you. I've watched it happen and I've made excuses because it was easier than confronting her. I've asked you to be the bigger person, to take the high road, to ignore her comments and be patient while she adjusted to our marriage. And that was wrong of me. I felt something in my chest loosen, a tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. David, but Emma, this pregnancy announcement, the way it happened, it's complicated everything. Now instead of celebrating our baby, we're dealing with lawyers and social media and family members taking sides. Our child's first mention in the world is connected to a family feud. He was right, and I knew it. But I also knew that I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't take back the photo or the anger that had driven me to send it. All I could do was deal with the consequences and try to protect our family going forward. What do you want to do? I asked. I want to focus on us, on our baby, on figuring out how to be parents. David reached for my hands, and I want to set some boundaries with my family, starting with my mother. What kind of boundaries? The kind that make it clear that you and our baby come first. That her behavior toward you has to change, or she won't be part of our lives. I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. You would really do that? You would choose us over her? Emma,
I chose you 3 years ago when I asked you to marry me. I'm choosing you again now, and I'll choose you every day for the rest of our lives, if that's what it takes." For the first time since the baby shower, I felt like I could breathe properly. David was finally seeing what I'd been dealing with, finally understanding that his mother's behavior wasn't just difficult or quirky or something to be tolerated, it was abusive, and it had to stop. But Margaret wasn't the type to accept boundaries gracefully. Over the next few days, she launched what could only be described as a campaign to regain control of the narrative. It started with phone calls to every family member she could reach, explaining her version of events and painting me as an unstable, vindictive woman who had deliberately humiliated her for sport. Then came the emails. Long, detailed messages to David about how disappointed she was in his choice of wife, how she'd tried to be welcoming but I'd always been cold and ungrateful, how my behavior at the baby shower was just the latest example of my true character, finally showing through. She sent flowers to our apartment with a card that read, "Congratulations on your pregnancy. I hope you'll consider the kind of example you want to set for your child." The passive-aggressive tone was so perfectly Margaret that I almost had to admire the skill behind it. But the worst part was the way she turned other family members against me. Sarah, David's sister, called to ask if I was having some kind of mental health crisis. David's father sent a text saying he was disappointed in how I'd handled things and hoped I would consider apologizing to keep the family together. Even David's grandmother, who had always been sweet to me, left a voicemail expressing concern about the unfortunate situation and asking if there was anything she could do to help us all move past this difficult time. Margaret was skilled at playing the victim, at making herself seem like the wounded party who had been unfairly attacked by her unstable daughter-in-law. She knew exactly how to frame the story to maximize sympathy for herself, while making me look petty, cruel, and unhinged. The social media attention made everything worse. Strangers were weighing in on our family drama, taking sides based on a single screenshot without any context about the years of abuse that had led to that moment. Some people supported me, calling Margaret a textbook narcissist and praising me for finally standing up for myself. Others criticized me for airing family business publicly and using my pregnancy as a weapon. The comments ranged from supportive to vicious, and I made the mistake of reading far too many of them. People dissected my appearance, my personality, my fitness to be a mother, all based on a single photo and a few lines of text. It was like being judged by a jury of strangers who thought they understood the complexities of 3 years of family dynamics from a social media post. David tried to shield me from the worst of it, but the stress was taking a toll. I was 7 weeks pregnant and supposed to be glowing with joy, planning nurseries and picking out baby names. Instead, I was fielding hostile calls from family members and watching strangers debate my character online. My doctor noticed the tension at my first prenatal appointment. "How are you feeling emotionally?" she asked after checking my blood pressure, which was higher than she liked. "Stressed," I admitted. "There's some family drama happening." Family drama can be particularly difficult during pregnancy. Your emotional well-being is just as important as your physical health right now. Have you considered talking to someone, a counselor or therapist who specializes in family issues? I hadn't considered it, but as I drove home from the appointment, the idea started to make sense. I needed someone objective to help me process what had happened and figure out how to move forward. Someone who wasn't connected to David's family or influenced by their version of events. I found a therapist who specialized in family conflict and toxic relationships. Dr. Sarah Martinez had availability the following week, and when I explained the situation over the phone, she didn't seem shocked or judgmental. She just listened and scheduled me for an appointment. "Family dynamics can be incredibly complex," she said, "especially when pregnancy enters the picture. There's often a lot of unresolved conflict that suddenly becomes urgent when a new generation is involved." The first session was revelatory. Dr. Martinez asked me to walk through the history of my relationship with Margaret, starting from the very beginning. As I talked, she took notes and asked clarifying questions that helped me see patterns I hadn't recognized before. "What you're describing sounds like emotional abuse," she said after I'd finished recounting 3 years of incidents. "Systematic attempts to undermine your self-worth." isolate you from family support, and make you question your own reality. The pregnancy test incident wasn't the first time you'd been attacked, it was just the first time you fought back. Hearing it labeled so clearly was both validating and terrifying. Validating because it confirmed that I hadn't been imagining or exaggerating Margaret's behavior. Terrifying because it meant that David's family was more dysfunctional than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. The question now, Dr. Martinez continued, is how you want to handle this going forward. You're having a baby, which means Margaret will be your child's grandmother whether you like it or not. You need to decide what kind of relationship, if any, you're willing to have with her, and what boundaries you need to protect yourself and your child. I left that session with homework to write down my non-negotiable boundaries for any future relationship with Margaret. What behavior I would and wouldn't tolerate. What consequences there would be for crossing those boundaries. How David and I could present a united front in enforcing them. But Margaret wasn't waiting for me to figure out my boundaries, she was escalating. It started with showing up at my workplace. I worked at a small marketing firm downtown, and our receptionist called back to tell me there was a woman in the lobby asking to see me about a family matter. When I went to investigate, there was Margaret sitting in our waiting area like she belonged there. We need to talk, she said when she saw me. This isn't the place for that conversation, I replied, very aware that my coworkers were watching from behind their computer screens. Then where is? You won't answer my calls. David hangs up on me. I'm trying to fix this situation, but you're making it impossible. Margaret, you need to leave. Now. I'm not leaving until we talk. I'm not the monster you're trying to make me out to be, Emma. I'm a grandmother now, and I have rights. The word rights sent a chill down my spine. You have no rights regarding my child. We'll see about that. She left then, but not before making sure everyone in the office had heard her threat. My boss Jennifer called me into her office afterward to ask if everything was okay at home. I had to explain the situation in vague terms, trying to make it sound like a normal family disagreement instead of the psychological warfare it was becoming. If this starts affecting your work or making you uncomfortable here, let me know, Jennifer said. We can involve security if necessary. The fact that I might need security to protect me from my mother-in-law was surreal. But Margaret was escalating, becoming more desperate and therefore more dangerous. She was losing control of the situation and the family narrative, and she was striking out in increasingly erratic ways. That evening, David and I had the most serious conversation of our marriage. We sat at our kitchen table with my list of boundaries and his own notes about his family's behavior, trying to figure out how to protect ourselves and our unborn child from the chaos Margaret was creating. She mentioned grandparents' rights today, I told him. She actually threatened me with legal action to get access to our baby. David's face went pale. She wouldn't do that. David, she showed up at my job today. She's posting about our private business on social media. She's turned half your family against me and is threatening lawsuits. What exactly do you think she wouldn't do? He was quiet for a long time, processing the reality of who his mother was becoming in this situation. Or maybe recognizing who she had always been, but had been too loyal to see clearly. What do you want to do? He asked finally. I want to go no contact. Complete radio silence until after the baby is born, at minimum, maybe longer. I showed him my list of boundaries. And if she ever wants a relationship with our child, she has to apologize. Genuinely apologize, not just say she's sorry I was offended. She has to acknowledge that her behavior was wrong, and commit to changing it. And if she doesn't, then she doesn't get to be part of our child's life. David, I can't have my son or daughter growing up thinking it's normal for family members to treat each other the way your mother treats me. I won't let our child learn that abuse is acceptable as long as it comes from someone who claims to love you. David stared at the list for a long time, reading through my carefully documented boundaries and consequences. When he looked up, his eyes were sad but determined. Okay, he said, we'll do it your way. No contact until she can prove she's changed. Even if that means you don't talk to her either, Emma, you're my family now, you and this baby. My job is to protect you, not to manage my mother's feelings. It was the answer I'd needed to hear for 3 years. David was finally choosing us over the dysfunction he'd grown up with. Finally seeing that loyalty to family didn't mean accepting abuse from family. But cutting contact with Margaret was easier said than done. She escalated further when she realized we were serious about the boundaries. The phone calls became more frequent and more desperate. She started sending letters to our apartment, emotional appeals about how she was being punished for loving her son too much, how I was keeping her grandchild from her before it was even born. She contacted my parents, whom she'd met only twice, to express concern about my mental state and suggest that I might need professional help. She reached out to my sister, my college friends, anyone she could find on social media who was connected to me, trying to build a case that I was unstable and vindictive. The campaign was sophisticated and relentless. Margaret was fighting for control of the family narrative, and she was willing to use every weapon in her arsenal to win. She positioned herself as the loving grandmother being kept from her grandchild by a cruel and irrational daughter-in-law. She shared old photos of David's childhood, talked about all the ways she'd planned to spoil her grandchildren, painted herself as the victim of my unreasonable anger. Some people bought it. David's extended family was largely convinced that I was overreacting, that Margaret's comments at the baby shower were just unfortunate words spoken in a moment of emotion, that families should forgive and move on for the sake of the children. But others saw through it. My friends rallied around me, offering support and sharing their own stories of toxic family members. David's cousin Jennifer, who had always been perceptive about family dynamics, called to say she believed me, and thought we were doing the right thing. Even some of Margaret's own friends privately reached out to express concern about her behavior. The stress was affecting my pregnancy, my blood pressure remained elevated, and I was having trouble sleeping. The doctor recommended reducing stress as much as possible, which meant limiting my exposure to social media and family drama. David took over all communication with his family, shielding me from the worst of Margaret's attempts to manipulate the situation. But the isolation was difficult too. I'd lost not just Margaret but David's entire extended family. Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday parties, all of it was gone. I'd known that setting boundaries would have consequences, but I hadn't fully prepared for how lonely it would feel to be cut off from an entire side of our family tree. 3 months into the pregnancy, Margaret played her final card.
She hired a lawyer and sent us a formal letter demanding visitation rights and threatening to petition the court for access to our child once it was born. The letter was full of legal language about the best interests of the child and the importance of grandparent relationships, but the message was clear: she would fight us in court if necessary to maintain control. David was devastated. She's really doing this. She's really trying to sue us for access to our baby. Then we'll fight her, I said, though the prospect terrified me. We'll document everything she's done, get character witnesses, show the court exactly who she is. Emma, this could get ugly. Really ugly. It's already ugly. David. The only difference is now we have to defend ourselves legally instead of just emotionally. We hired our own attorney, a family law specialist who had experience with grandparents' rights cases. She reviewed Margaret's letter and our documentation of her behavior, then gave us her honest assessment. Grandparents' rights are limited in this state, especially when the parents are married and competent, she explained. But your mother-in-law seems determined to make this as difficult as possible. We need to be prepared for a prolonged legal battle. The legal fees alone would be devastating, but the emotional cost would be even higher. Margaret was forcing us to choose between our financial security and our family's safety. She was making our child's birth about her needs instead of our joy. That night, lying in bed with my hand on my growing belly, I made a decision. Margaret could have her legal battle. She could spend her money on lawyers and court fees and character assassinations. But she wouldn't win, because she couldn't force love or trust or relationships through legal action. Our child would grow up knowing the truth about their grandmother. They would understand that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. They would learn that family is about more than blood, that respect and kindness matter more than genetic connections. And if Margaret ever wanted to be part of our lives, she would have to earn that privilege through genuine change, not legal coercion. The days of her controlling our family through guilt and manipulation were over. I was done being afraid of her, done trying to manage her emotions, done sacrificing my peace for her approval. The war she'd started was far from over, but for the first time since this began, I felt like I might actually win. The legal battle never materialized the way Margaret had threatened.
Her lawyer, after reviewing the case and the evidence we'd compiled of her behavior, quietly advised her that grandparents' rights claims rarely succeeded when both parents were united and competent. The threatening letters stopped coming, but Margaret's silence felt more ominous than her previous attacks. I was 6 months pregnant when she made her final move. It came disguised as an olive branch, a carefully crafted letter delivered to our apartment by certified mail. The handwriting was Margaret's, but the tone was completely different from anything she'd sent before. "Dear Emma and David," it began. "I've spent these past months reflecting on my behavior, and I realize I owe you both a sincere apology. I allowed my fear of losing my son to cloud my judgment and treat Emma with disrespect she never deserved. I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain I've caused." The letter went on for 3 pages, acknowledging specific incidents, accepting responsibility for her actions, and promising to respect whatever boundaries we needed to set. It sounded genuine, remorseful, like everything I'd hoped to hear from her for years. David read it twice before looking at me with cautious hope. "This sounds different, Emma. This sounds real," but something about the timing felt off. Margaret had been silent for 2 months, no calls or letters or attempts at manipulation, and suddenly she was ready to take full responsibility for years of abuse. It felt too convenient, too perfectly crafted to hit all the right emotional notes. "I want to believe it," I told David. "But I need more than words on paper." "What would you need? What would convince you she's serious?" I thought about it for days before answering. "Actions. Consistent long-term changes in behavior. And therapy. If she's really committed to changing, she needs professional help to understand why she acted the way she did." David called his mother to discuss our terms. The conversation was surprisingly civil, with Margaret agreeing to everything we asked for. She would start therapy immediately, respect our no-contact boundary until after the baby was born, and prove through actions that she was capable of change. "She sounded different," David told me afterward. "Humble. Like she really gets it." I wanted to believe him, but 3 years of Margaret's manipulation had taught me to be skeptical of anything that seemed too good to be true. Still, I was exhausted from the constant conflict and stress. If she was genuinely trying to change, maybe we could find a way to coexist peacefully for our child's sake. Our daughter was born on a crisp October morning, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of perfect healthy baby. David cried when the doctor placed her on my chest, and I felt a love so overwhelming it made everything else seem small and distant. We named her Grace, partly because we liked the name, and partly because it felt like Grace was exactly what our family needed. Margaret didn't contact us immediately after the birth, which I took as a good sign. She was respecting our boundaries, giving us space to bond with our daughter without her interference. David sent a single text to his family announcing Grace's arrival, and the responses were appropriately congratulatory without being pushy. For 3 weeks we lived in a peaceful bubble of new parenthood. Late-night feedings, diaper changes, the constant wonder of watching this tiny person we'd created. David was on paternity leave, and we spent our days learning how to be parents without the shadow of family drama hanging over us. Then Margaret asked to meet her granddaughter. The request came through David, presented as humbly as possible. She'd been in therapy for 4 months, was making real progress according to her counselor, and wondered if we might consider a brief supervised visit. Nothing dramatic, just an hour at our apartment with both of us present. "She seems different, Aim," David said as we discussed it over Grace's afternoon nap. "The therapist thing is real. I checked, and she's been going twice a week since August." "What does her therapist say about her progress?" Obviously I can't talk to the therapist directly, but Mom shared some insights she's learned. About control issues, about fear of abandonment, about how her own mother treated her daughters-in-law. She's connecting dots she never connected before. Part of me remained skeptical, but another part was curious. Could Margaret really change? Could years of toxic behavior be unlearned through therapy and genuine commitment? And if she had changed, did I want to deny Grace the chance to know her grandmother? We agreed to 1 visit, with strict conditions. 1 hour maximum, in our home, with both of us present the entire time. Any inappropriate behavior or boundary crossing would end the visit immediately. Margaret agreed to everything without argument. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a single small gift wrapped in soft yellow paper.
She looked older than I remembered, more fragile somehow, as if the past few months had worn her down in ways that went beyond the physical. "Thank you for giving me this chance," she said quietly when we opened the door. "I know I don't deserve it." The Margaret who walked into our apartment was almost unrecognizable from the woman who had humiliated me at that baby shower. She was subdued, careful with her words, genuinely interested in hearing about Grace's birth and our experience as new parents. When I handed her the baby, she held Grace with a tenderness I'd never seen from her before. "She's beautiful," Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. "She looks like David did when he was born, but she has your nose, Emma." It was the first compliment she'd ever given me, and it caught me off guard. For 45 minutes, she was the grandmother I'd always hoped she could be. Gentle, supportive, interested in our welfare instead of her own agenda. But as the visit wound down, something shifted. Margaret's comments became more pointed, her questions more probing. She asked about our childcare plans, our financial situation, whether we were getting enough help from my family. The inquiries felt innocent on the surface, but I recognized the pattern from years of experience. "We're managing just fine," I said carefully. "Of course you are. I just know how overwhelming new parenthood can be. When David was born, I was completely lost without my mother's help." She paused, bouncing Grace gently. "I hope you know I'm here if you need anything. Babysitting, help with housework, whatever you need." There it was. The hook hidden inside the olive branch. Margaret wasn't offering help out of generosity, she was positioning herself as indispensable so we'd become dependent on her again. Once she was regularly in our home, caring for Grace, it would be much harder to maintain boundaries or cut contact if her behavior reverted to its old patterns. "That's thoughtful," David said before I could respond. "But we're taking things slow right now. Getting used to being a family of 3. Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I just want you to know the offer stands. Grace is my only grandchild, and I want to be as involved as you'll allow." After she left, David and I debriefed the visit. He thought it had gone well, saw it as evidence that Margaret was genuinely changing. I was less convinced. She was fishing for information, I told him. Trying to figure out where we might be vulnerable, where she could position herself as necessary. "Maybe you're reading too much into it. Maybe she was just trying to be helpful." David, leopards don't change their spots in 4 months of therapy. She was better than usual, I'll give you that, but the manipulation was still there. Just more subtle. We agreed to think about it before deciding on future visits. But Margaret didn't wait for our decision. Over the next few days, gifts started arriving. Baby clothes, toys, books, a high-end stroller we hadn't asked for. Each delivery came with a note expressing her love for Grace and her desire to be a good grandmother. Then came the social media posts. Carefully crafted messages about the joy of becoming a grandmother, the blessing of family healing, the importance of forgiveness and second chances. She posted old photos of David as a baby alongside publicly available photos of Grace, creating a narrative about family resemblance and genetic legacy. She was rebuilding her public image, positioning herself as the reformed grandmother who had overcome past mistakes to embrace her new role. The posts were liked and shared by family members and friends, creating social pressure for us to maintain the reconciliation she was advertising. "She's doing it again," I told David after seeing the latest Facebook post, which included a photo of Margaret holding Grace during our visit. "She's controlling the narrative, making it look like we're one big happy family again. But aren't we trying to be? Isn't that what we want?" I want genuine change, not a performance designed to get her what she wants. The truth was, I didn't trust Margaret's transformation because I'd seen her perform before. She was capable of being charming, loving and appropriate when it served her purposes. The question was whether this new version of herself would last when she faced stress or didn't get her way. I got my answer 3 weeks later. David had to travel for work, a 2-day trip to Boston he couldn't reschedule. Margaret offered to help with Grace while he was gone, and despite my reluctance, the offer was practical. I was still exhausted from broken sleep and adjusting to single parenting, even temporarily. Just during the day, I agreed. "You can come over in the morning and leave before dinner." The first day went smoothly. Margaret arrived on time, helped with Grace's care without being overbearing, and left when I asked her to. She was the model grandmother, supportive without being intrusive. But the second day revealed her true agenda. I woke up that morning feeling sick, probably something I'd eaten the night before. I was nauseous and lightheaded, definitely not at my best for baby care. When Margaret arrived and saw my condition, she immediately took charge. "You look terrible, Emma. You should go back to bed and let me handle everything today." Under normal circumstances, I might have accepted the help gratefully. But something about her tone, the way she immediately positioned herself as the responsible adult while treating me like an incapable child, triggered all my old defenses. "I'm fine," I said. "Just a little under the weather." "You're clearly not fine. What if you faint while holding Grace? What if you're too sick to properly care for her?" Margaret was already taking Grace from her bouncy seat, settling into the routine of feeding and care. "I'll stay until David gets home tomorrow." "You need rest, Margaret. I appreciate the concern, but I don't need you to stay overnight." "Emma, be reasonable. You're in no condition to care for an infant alone. What would David say if he knew I left you like this?" There it was. The guilt, the implication that I was being selfish or irresponsible, the subtle threat to tell David I'd refused help when I needed it. All the old manipulation tactics wrapped up in apparent concern for my welfare. David would say that I'm Grace's mother, and I'm capable of making decisions about her care. Margaret's facade cracked slightly. "Of course you're her mother. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm trying to help you. By taking over when I'm temporarily sick. By deciding what's best for my daughter without consulting me." "Emma, please, I'm just worried about Grace's safety." The implication that I was somehow dangerous to my own child, when I had a minor stomach bug, was so insulting it took my breath away. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of my apartment." Now Margaret's mask fell away completely then, revealing the familiar anger and indignation I remembered so well. "You're being ridiculous. I'm trying to help, and you're acting like I'm attacking you." "You are attacking me. You're questioning my fitness as a mother because I have an upset stomach. You're trying to insert yourself into a situation where you're not needed, and then making me feel guilty for not accepting your interference. I'm Grace's grandmother. I have a right to be concerned about her welfare. You have no rights regarding my daughter except what David and I choose to give you. And right now, I'm choosing to give you nothing." The argument escalated from there, with Margaret pulling out every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. I was ungrateful, vindictive, using Grace as a weapon against her, preventing her from being a loving grandmother. She'd been trying so hard to change, going to therapy, respecting our boundaries, and this was how I repaid her efforts. But I was done falling for the guilt trips and emotional manipulation. I was done pretending that Margaret's wants were more important than my family's needs. I was done being afraid of her anger, or her ability to turn people against me. "Leave now, or I'm calling the police," I said calmly. She left, but not before delivering one final threat disguised as concern. "David is going to hear about this, Emma. He's going to know how you treated me when I was just trying to help." After she was gone, I called David and told him exactly what had happened. He was quiet for a long time before responding. "I'm sorry, Emma. I thought she had really changed. Maybe part of her has. But the core manipulation is still there. She just got better at hiding it." "What do you want to do?" "I want to go back to no contact. Permanently this time." David didn't argue. When he got home the next day, he called his mother and told her that her behavior had proven she wasn't ready for a relationship with our family. The therapy was good, the letter had been sincere, but lasting change required more time than she'd invested. Margaret's response was predictably explosive. The humble, apologetic woman from the letter disappeared, replaced by the familiar victim who had been wronged by her cruel daughter-in-law. She accused me of sabotaging her relationship with her son, of using Grace as a weapon, of being vindictive and unforgiving.
But this time, David didn't waver. He defended me completely, told his mother that her behavior toward me had been unacceptable from the beginning, and made it clear that any future relationship would require genuine, lasting change verified by actions, not words. 6 months later, Margaret sent one final letter. Not to both of us this time, just to me. It was shorter than her previous apology, less polished, more raw. "Emma," it said, "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I want you to know that I understand now what I put you through. My therapist helped me see that my behavior toward you was abusive, and I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for access to your family. I just wanted you to know that you were right to protect yourself and Grace from me. I hope someday I can be the person my son and granddaughter deserve to have in their lives." I never responded to that letter, but I kept it, not as a trophy or vindication, but as a reminder that change is possible, even if it takes longer than anyone wants it to. Margaret might genuinely be working on herself, might eventually become the grandmother Grace deserves to know, but that's a decision for the future, when I can be sure that any relationship would be healthy for everyone involved. For now, our family is peaceful, happy, and free from the drama that defined our early years together. Grace is 2 years old now, a bright, joyful child who knows she's loved unconditionally by her parents. She's never known the toxicity of manipulation or emotional abuse, never learned that family love comes with conditions and requirements. Sometimes people ask if I regret cutting Margaret out of our lives, if I feel guilty about depriving Grace of her grandmother. The answer is simple: I'll never regret protecting my child from harm, even if that harm comes from family. Love isn't about genetics or obligation, it's about respect, kindness, and creating safe spaces for the people you care about to grow and thrive. And in our quiet apartment, with our daughter's laughter filling the rooms where arguments used to echo, I know I made the right choice. Family isn't just about who you're related to, it's about who shows up with love instead of conditions, support instead of control, and respect instead of demands. We're exactly the family we were meant to be. 4 years had passed since I'd last spoken to Margaret. Grace was starting kindergarten, a bright, confident little girl who asked thoughtful questions and gave the warmest hugs. David and I had built a life free from the toxicity that once consumed our family gatherings, and honestly, I rarely thought about his mother anymore. Then David's father had a heart attack. The call came on a Tuesday evening while we were having dinner. David's face went pale as he listened to his sister Sarah explain what had happened. Robert was stable but needed surgery, and the family was gathering at the hospital. Margaret was beside herself, Sarah said, and kept asking if David was coming. "I have to go," David told me after ending the call. "Whatever happened between us and Mom, he's still my father." I understood completely. Robert had never been actively cruel to me the way Margaret had, just passive and unwilling to intervene. He was a decent man caught between his wife and son, and David loved him deeply. "Of course you should go. Grace and I will be fine here. Will you come with me?" To the hospital. I considered it for a moment. Seeing Margaret again after 4 years of peace felt like stepping backward into a nightmare I'd worked hard to escape. But David needed support, and I wasn't going to let fear of his mother keep me from being there for my husband. "Yes, but Grace stays home with a babysitter. I won't expose her to potential drama." We arranged for our neighbor Mrs. Chen to watch Grace and drove to the hospital in relative silence. David was processing the possibility of losing his father while navigating the complex emotions around seeing his mother again. I was preparing myself for whatever version of Margaret would be waiting for us. The cardiac ICU waiting room was crowded with extended family I hadn't seen in years. David's aunts, cousins, and family friends who had taken sides during our conflict. Some nodded politely when they saw me, others looked away uncomfortably. Sarah hugged David tightly and gave me a cautious smile. Margaret was sitting in the corner, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Her hair was completely gray now, and she seemed smaller somehow, diminished by worry and time. When she saw David, her face crumpled with relief. "Oh David, thank God you came. I wasn't sure, after everything." David hugged her carefully, and I could see years of complicated emotions playing across his face. Love, hurt, anger, and grief all mixed together in that hospital embrace. Margaret's eyes met mine over David's shoulder. For a moment, I expected the familiar coldness or calculation, but what I saw instead was exhaustion and genuine sorrow. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement of my presence, then returned her attention to David. "How is he?" David asked. "The surgery went well, but he's not awake yet. The doctor said the next 24 hours are critical." Margaret's voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. "He kept asking for you before they took him in. Said he had things he needed to say." We settled in for a long wait. The ICU had strict visiting hours, allowing only 2 people at a time for brief periods. David and Margaret went in first, while I stayed in the waiting room with Sarah and the extended family. The atmosphere was tense, everyone carefully avoiding the obvious question of whether this crisis would bridge the divide in our family. Sarah sat down beside me, her own exhaustion evident. "Thank you for coming, Emma. I know this isn't easy." "How's he really doing?" I asked. "Touch and go." The blockage was severe, and his heart sustained some damage. "Mom's been here for 18 hours straight, refusing to leave even to eat." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's different, you know. The last few years have been hard on her." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me was curious about what Margaret's life had been like since we'd cut contact, but another part of me was wary of being pulled back into caring about her emotional state. "She talks about you and Grace sometimes," Sarah continued. "Wonders how you're doing, whether Grace looks like David, if you're happy. She never asks me to pass along messages or tries to manipulate the situation. She just wonders." When David and Margaret returned from Robert's room, David's eyes were red. He's awake, but barely. The medications make him groggy. He sat down heavily beside me. "Emma, he wants to see you." He said he has something he needs to tell you. Something he should have said years ago." I followed David back to the ICU, past the monitors and machines that were keeping Robert alive. He looked so frail in that hospital bed, a shadow of the robust man I remembered from family dinners. When he saw me, he tried to smile. "Emma," his voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for coming." I took the chair beside his bed, unsure what to say. Robert and I had never had a real conversation in all the years I'd known him. He'd been a background presence, pleasant but distant, avoiding conflict by staying silent. "I owe you an apology," he said, his words coming slowly. "I should have protected you from Margaret. I should have stood up to her, made her stop treating you badly. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." The unexpected apology brought tears to my eyes. "Robert, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I watched her hurt you for years and did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that you and David could handle it yourselves. But that was wrong, you were family and I failed you." He was quiet for a moment, gathering strength. "Margaret knows what she did was wrong. The therapy helped her see it clearly. She's not the same person she was 4 years ago, but I understand why you can't trust that. I wouldn't either, if I were you. Robert, focus on getting better. Don't worry about family drama right now. This is important, Emma. I need you to know that cutting us off was the right thing to do. You protected your family, and I respect that. But I also need you to know that Margaret is genuinely sorry, even if she can never undo the damage she caused." He fell asleep shortly after that, leaving me alone with thoughts I hadn't expected to have. Robert's apology meant something, because it was honest and without agenda. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, or trying to manipulate me into reconciliation. He was simply acknowledging the truth about what had happened, and taking responsibility for his part in it. The next few days blurred together. Robert's condition stabilized, then improved gradually. The family took shifts at the hospital, and I found myself in situations I hadn't experienced in years, sharing waiting room coffee with David's cousins, helping Margaret understand complex medical terms, being included in family decisions about Robert's care. Margaret and I didn't speak directly beyond polite exchanges, but I observed her carefully. She was different, more subdued and self-aware. She deferred to David's opinions instead of dominating conversations. She asked about Grace in general terms, but didn't push for details, or try to insert herself into our lives. Most importantly, she seemed to understand that her presence in our family was conditional on our comfort, not her desires. On the 4th day, Robert was moved out of the ICU to a regular room. His prognosis was good, though he'd need significant lifestyle changes and ongoing medical care. The crisis was over, and it was time for David and me to return to our normal life. As we prepared to leave the hospital, Margaret approached me in the hallway outside Robert's room. "Emma, could I speak with you for a moment?" David started to follow, but I indicated he should give us privacy. Whatever Margaret had to say, I wanted to hear it without intermediaries. "I want to thank you for being here this week," she began. "You didn't have to come, especially after everything I put you through. But you came anyway, for David and for Robert. That means more to me than you know. I came for my husband, I said simply. I know, and that's exactly what a good wife does. What I should have recognized from the beginning. Margaret looked down at her hands. I also want you to know that I don't expect this week to change anything between us. I understand why you can't trust me, and I'm not asking you to. I just wanted you to see that I'm trying to be different. Margaret, I hope you are different, for your own sake and for Robert's. But you're right that this week doesn't erase 4 years of hurt. I know, and I'm not asking it to. She paused, then looked directly at me. I am asking for one thing though. Someday, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, would you consider letting me meet Grace? Not as her grandmother, necessarily, just as someone who loves her father and wants to know the little person you've created together. The request was carefully worded, with no pressure or expectation attached. Margaret wasn't demanding rights or threatening consequences. She was simply asking, as humbly as possible, for a chance she knew she might never get. I'll think about it, I said, which was the most honest answer I could give. That's all I can ask for. A year later, on Grace's 6th birthday, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I called Margaret and invited her to Grace's birthday party. Not as a reconciliation or forgiveness, but as an experiment in controlled exposure. Grace deserved to know her extended family, and Margaret deserved a chance to prove the changes she claimed to have made. The party was small, just our closest friends and David's immediate family. Margaret arrived with a simple gift and stayed for exactly 2 hours, interacting with Grace, gently but without trying to establish herself as a central figure. She complimented Grace's artwork, listened to her stories about school, and answered questions about David's childhood, with warmth but without overwhelming enthusiasm. Most importantly, she treated me with respect. She thanked me for the invitation, helped clean up without being asked, and left when the party ended, without trying to extend her visit or negotiate future contact. Grace liked her, which wasn't surprising. Margaret could be charming when she wanted to be, and she was clearly making an effort to be the grandmother Grace deserved. But liking someone and trusting them were different things, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. Over the following months, we established a careful routine. Margaret could attend family events if invited, but she couldn't initiate contact directly. She could interact with Grace in our presence, but never alone. She could express opinions about Grace's development and activities, but she couldn't make demands or try to influence our parenting decisions. The boundaries were clear and non-negotiable, and Margaret respected them completely. She seemed to understand that this limited relationship was a privilege, not a right, and that maintaining it required consistent demonstration of changed behavior. Now 2 years later, Margaret is a peripheral but positive presence in Grace's life. She attends birthday parties and school performances, sends appropriate gifts on holidays, and has even babysat Grace a few times when we were desperate and no other options were available. She's never once overstepped the boundaries we established or tried to manipulate situations to her advantage. Is she genuinely changed, or is she simply better at controlling her worst impulses? I honestly don't know, and I've made peace with that uncertainty. What matters is that Grace has a relationship with her grandmother that adds value to her life without causing harm to our family. The woman who once told me I wasn't woman enough for her son now watches our daughter with obvious pride and affection. The grandmother who threatened legal action to force access to her grandchild now waits patiently for invitations and accepts whatever level of involvement we're comfortable with. Sometimes people ask if I regret the years of no contact, if I wish I'd forgiven Margaret sooner and given Grace access to her grandmother earlier. The answer is no. Those years of separation were necessary for Margaret to do the work of changing, and for our family to heal from the damage she'd caused. Grace is better off having a reformed grandmother now than she would have been having a toxic one from the beginning. Family relationships don't always follow neat timelines or fairy tale redemptions. Sometimes the best outcome is the one that prioritizes safety and peace over forgiveness and reconciliation. Sometimes loving someone means protecting yourself and your children from their worst impulses, even if it means missing out on their best moments. But sometimes, if you're patient and firm and willing to take calculated risks, people can surprise you. Not everyone is capable of genuine change, but some people are. The trick is knowing the difference and protecting yourself while they figure it out. Margaret may never be the mother-in-law I dreamed of having, but she's become the grandmother Grace deserves to know. And in the end, that's enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.